Daniel Thompson never imagined that an inheritance from his late uncle would lead him into a life or death struggle. If pressured by someone as powerful as Karen Whitmore, would he fight back or run to protect his family? Daniel Thompson squinted at the thick envelope on the table, his fingers lightly brushing over the law office's seal. He opened it, eyes scanning each line, but before he could fully process the contents, one name jumped out at him: Uncle Frank. "What?" he muttered, sitting up straight. 3 minutes later, Daniel called the law office. There must be some mistake. Uncle Frank's cabin? The lawyer's calm, yet firm voice came through the phone. There's no mistake, Daniel. He left it to you. The legal papers are all in order, signed and everything. Daniel fell silent, his fingers unconsciously tapping lightly on the table. The image of those old summer days flooded his mind: golden afternoons, nights spent camping by the fire, the sound of Uncle Frank's hoarse laughter as he told wild stories about the forest. The cabin wasn't just a wooden house. It was his entire childhood. Do you plan to sell it? The lawyer asked. Daniel chuckled softly. No, I want to keep it. But little did he know that this decision would pull him into a battle he couldn't have anticipated. 3 days later, Daniel drove to the cabin. He stepped out, taking a deep breath. The faint scent of pine resin lingered in the air, a smell that had been deeply etched into his memories. The old wooden door still stood strong, though some of the planks had weathered with time. He placed his hand on the darkened wall, almost as if he could hear Uncle Frank's voice echoing somewhere. Never let anyone take something you cherish, kid. Daniel chuckled to himself. I know, Uncle. But that joy didn't last long. Just 2 days later, as Daniel was fixing the porch, a shiny black SUV rolled into the empty lot in front of the cabin. A well-dressed man stepped out, his polite smile not quite hiding the sharpness in his eyes. Mr. Thompson? Daniel put the hammer down, wiping his hands. That's me, and you are? The assistant handed him a business card, but Daniel didn't even glance at it. Ms. Whitmore sent me. She's interested in the land, and she's willing to offer a very generous sum. Daniel crossed his arms. I'm not selling. The assistant kept smiling. You're sure you don't want to hear the figure first? Yes, Daniel replied curtly. The assistant's smile faded. He nodded, slipping the business card into his jacket pocket, his voice dropping lower. I think you should reconsider, Mr. Thompson. Sometimes there are things that aren't worth holding on to. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Is that advice or a threat? The assistant smirked. Just a friendly suggestion. And then he left. But Daniel had no idea. The story wasn't over yet. A few weeks later, things began to escalate. One morning, Daniel received a summons from the town court. A construction violation? Daniel furrowed his brow at the paperwork. He hadn't made any major repairs to the cabin. How could he be in legal trouble? As he walked out of his auto repair shop, a stranger stood waiting for him. He didn't say anything, just stared at him, his cold eyes full of hidden meaning. And then, that fateful night arrived. His phone buzzed in the middle of the night. Daniel, your cabin. It's on fire. He threw the phone down, rushed to his car, the wind howling in his ears as he floored the gas pedal through the night. When he arrived, the sight before him left him speechless. Flames were consuming the cabin, each beam snapping and crackling under the heat. The smell of smoke, the stench of burning pine resin, the sound of the wind howling through the trees. Daniel rushed forward but was pulled back by someone. You can't go in. It's too late. He stood frozen, watching everything turn to ash, his chest tightening with rage and sorrow. The next morning, when Daniel arrived at the police station, 2 officers exchanged a glance and then nonchalantly took down notes. We'll investigate. This was arson, Daniel growled. One of the officers shrugged. Do you have any proof? Daniel gritted his teeth. I'll find it myself. He knew he couldn't rely on the police, but he didn't expect the answer to come to him so soon. The next morning, A strange man appeared in front of his auto repair shop, all experienced looking, with sharp eyes as if seeing through everything. Jason Mead. Who are you? Daniel asked cautiously. Jason didn't answer right away. He looked around and then whispered, Do you want to find the person who burned your cabin? Daniel squinted. What do you know? Jason crossed his arms, leaning against the truck parked nearby. Karen Whitmore doesn't just want your cabin. She has power in the town government. You're not the first person she's targeted. Daniel stayed silent. He wasn't sure if he could trust this guy. But then Jason pulled out an envelope and tossed it onto the hood of Daniel's car. There are documents in there. Evidence of land seizures, corruption, and cases just like yours. I used to be a cop, but I was set up while investigating Karen. Daniel still wasn't fully convinced. So, what do you want? Jason looked at him, his voice dropping. I want to bring Karen down. Daniel smirked. Just the two of us? She's got an entire system. Jason laughed softly. We don't need to confront her head on. We just need the evidence. Daniel stared at the envelope of documents. His fingers involuntarily clenched. He thought about walking away. He thought he could ignore it. But when the image of the cabin burning flashed in his mind, he knew. There was no turning back now. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes fixed on the dim streetlights reflecting off the car hood. His two daughters were still asleep in the back seat, unaware that their father was struggling with a decision that could change their entire lives. Jason sat in the passenger seat, flipping through the stack of files. He didn't speak, just waited for Daniel to say something. Do you have kids? Daniel asked unexpectedly. Jason glanced at him, shaking his head. No. Daniel took a deep breath. Then you wouldn't understand. Jason was silent for a few seconds before he spoke softly. Maybe I don't understand what it's like to be a father, but I understand what it's like to lose everything. He pushed the file stack toward Daniel. Do you think Karen will stop if you give in? Daniel didn't respond immediately. He thought about his two daughters, their laughter echoing every time they told him stories about school, their innocent voices ringing out when they played in the yard. If he kept going, would they one day get dragged into this fight? Jason looked at him, his eyes cold. You have two choices, Thompson. One is to turn a blind eye, live in fear, and let Karen do whatever she wants. The other is to stand up. Daniel closed his eyes, his voice low. You don't know how long I've worked for this peaceful life. Peaceful? Jason chuckled softly. The cops turned a blind eye when your cabin burned. Some jerk fired a warning shot right in front of your house. And you still think you can keep the peace? Daniel fell silent. Jason leaned forward. You're not doing this for the cabin. You're doing it for yourself, for your daughters. Because if you don't do something, they won't leave you alone. Daniel stared at the road ahead. He remembered his uncle's voice. Some things can't be bought with money, and if you don't protect them, someone else will take them from you. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his gaze hardening. Get the evidence. Find the one who gave the order to burn the cabin. And make sure Karen doesn't get away with it. Jason smiled faintly. Now I'm starting to like you. A few days later, they got a name, Martin. This guy used to work for Karen, Jason said as they parked in front of a run-down motel on the outskirts. He was the one who cleaned up her trash. Daniel squinted. Trash? Jason tapped lightly on the file. People who refused to sell their land, inconvenient witnesses, problems that needed to disappear. They approached the dilapidated door, and Jason knocked hard. No response. He knocked again. Go away. A hoarse voice called out from inside. Jason didn't care, pushing the door open with force. Inside, there was a scrawny man with deep bags under his eyes, his hands trembling as he clutched a bottle of alcohol. Martin, Jason smirked. You don't look so good. Martin jumped, his eyes darting around like he was looking for an escape. I don't know who you are, but you know why we're here, Jason said, stepping forward. Daniel's cabin. The fire. The rainy night. Does that ring a bell? Martin shook his head, sweat pouring down his forehead. I don't know anything. Jason set a stack of documents on the table. Photos, receipts, and some signed papers from Karen. Martin glanced at them, his face draining of color. Daniel crossed his arms, his voice dropping. Tell us, Martin. Who burned the cabin? Martin swallowed hard, panic in his eyes. I don't know. Jason raised an eyebrow, pulling up a chair. I used to be a cop, Martin. I know what a liar looks like. Martin looked around, then hung his head. I didn't do it myself. Daniel raised an eyebrow. But you know who did. Silence. Jason placed his hand on the gun holstered at his side, not pulling it out, just letting Martin see it. Speak, before Karen decides you're trash too. Martin shuddered, clutching the bottle tighter. All right. It was a guy named Rick. He's a professional. Pay him, and he does it, no questions asked. Jason glanced at Daniel. Now we've got a new target. Daniel nodded. Track him down. But they didn't get a chance to act before Karen made her move. One morning, Daniel opened his door to find a letter from the court. Illegal land use. Unauthorized repairs. Summoned to court. He crumpled the paper and threw it on the ground. Damn it! It didn't stop there. That afternoon, as he dropped his 2 daughters off at school, a man stepped out of the shadows, raised a gun to the sky, and fired 3 shots. Boom, boom, boom. Daniel grabbed his daughters tightly, his heart pounding. The stranger didn't say a word, just smirked, shoved the gun into his jacket, and walked away. That night, Daniel sat at the dinner table, head bowed, hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Jason leaned against the wall, his voice low. You want to keep going? Daniel looked up, his eyes dark. They've dared to target my children. If I stop now, they'll think I'm weak. Jason nodded slightly. Then we fight back. Karen didn't sit still either. 2 days later, Jason met Daniel at the repair shop, placed a phone on the table, and pressed play. Karen's voice echoed. Tell Jason Reed I've got an offer. A number large enough for him to forget everything. Daniel glared. She's trying to buy you off? Jason smirked. I pretended to agree to get more information. And she said enough to convict herself. Jason pressed stop. Daniel looked at him, still full of doubt. Jason sighed, looking Daniel in the eye. You think I'm betraying you? Daniel didn't answer right away. But then he relaxed his fist, nodding. No, you had the chance to sell me out, but you didn't. Jason chuckled bitterly. I hate Karen more than I need the money. But Karen wasn't so easily fooled. She quickly realized she'd been trapped, and she ordered their elimination. The engine roared behind them. Headlights flashed toward them. Jason yelled, Run! Daniel grabbed the files and ran into the darkness. The gunshots rang out behind them. Jason stumbled, his hands soaked in blood. Daniel screamed, Jason! Jason gritted his teeth, shoving Daniel ahead. Take the evidence. I'll hold him off. Daniel shook his head. No. Go! Jason barked, his eyes cold. Daniel glanced at his friend for a second, then turned and ran deeper into the forest. The gunshot still rang out behind them, but he didn't stop. Because now, there was no turning back. The sound of police sirens suddenly pierced the silence of the wilderness. Flashing red and blue lights from patrol cars cut through the trees, illuminating shadowy figures in the dark. The gunfire and chaos from the pursuit had definitely attracted the attention of nearby residents. They had called the police, and now, the authorities had arrived. Go, run! One of Karen's goons shouted, rushing to pull the others back from the scene. They left the injured behind, caring nothing for their wounds. The group quickly disappeared into the dark, like rats scurrying from the light. Daniel staggered toward the cabin, his legs weary, but determined not to let himself fall. He knew there was only one way to resolve everything. He had to find Jason. The fear and anxiety made him move faster. When he got there, his eyes scanned the area, then stopped at a tree nearby. Jason, his companion, was sitting against it, pale but managing a weak smile. "Jason," Daniel exhaled, moving closer. "You're still alive." Jason tried to grin. "Thought you'd been shot." "Guess they didn't want to waste bullets on scum like them," Daniel said softly. But his smile quickly faded, replaced by worry. "We have to leave now. The police are coming." The two of them helped each other out of the woods, step by step, their bodies exhausted but neither daring to stop. Running wasn't their only option, but right now, it was the only way to escape Karen and her goons. Once they were out of the woods, Daniel pulled a file from his bag, filled with the important evidence they had just gathered. "What are you going to do with this?" Jason asked, his eyes anxious as he looked at the documents. "I have to back it up. Send it to the FBI. If we give it to the local police, we're just handing it over to Karen," Daniel said, carefully taking photos of the documents on his phone. "This will be our only chance to clear everything up." With the FBI's involvement, a large-scale investigation was launched. Karen was arrested on numerous charges, including arson, attempted murder, and corruption. The town was shaken by the news. Images of Karen in handcuffs spread across the media, leaving those who once feared her in disbelief. Some people sighed in relief, while others remained unsettled, afraid of what might come next. Whispers spread about the true power behind Karen, someone who had helped her climb to power. "It's unbelievable," one of the town's residents said, staring at the pictures in the newspaper. "There has to be someone else behind her, some power we don't know about." Daniel understood better than anyone that this fight wasn't over. Even though Karen had been arrested, there were still many unanswered questions. The FBI began to investigate deeper into land deals and corruption, and everything was slowly being exposed. However, Daniel's family couldn't find peace. The FBI advised him and his children to move to a safer place, at least until the investigation was complete. Daniel's heart ached as he had to leave his auto repair shop, the place he had poured his heart and soul into. This town, with its sweet memories of childhood, had now become a place full of danger. He looked at his two young daughters, his eyes full of worry. "We have to go, kids," he said, holding their hands tightly. "This is temporary. One day, we'll come back." With the small compensation for the cabin being burned down, Daniel's family moved to a city several hundred miles away. Their new life began, but everything felt different. They might be safe for now, but the shadow of the past still loomed over them. After his wounds were treated, Jason didn't stop working to clear his name. He realized that even though he had helped Daniel take down Karen, his past had not been wiped clean. He had been wrongfully accused, turned into a villain in the eyes of the public. To restore his lost honor, Jason had to submit additional evidence and go through several hearings. Though facing many difficulties, he felt a sense of relief deep in his heart. He knew he had played a part in making an evil person pay. As for Karen, even though she was held accountable before the law, she still kept her arrogant demeanor in her temporary cell. People in the know whispered that her lawyer was looking for legal loopholes, potentially reducing her sentence. No one knew how long she would be in prison, but clearly, the consequences of her deceitful actions over the years were still being exposed. However, a larger mystery was waiting. One evening, as Daniel was unpacking in their new home, he happened to read a news headline online. The investigation into Karen Whitmore's corporation shows signs of connection to a major criminal organization. Daniel took a deep breath, a cold shiver running down his spine. Deep in his heart, he understood that this fight wasn't over. Even though he could leave the town, the web of power still spun, threatening not only him, but also many other innocent people. Late in the year, as darkness fell, in a high-rise building, a man in the shadows stood. He held a phone, his voice cold as he spoke. "Karen has been caught, but the game has only just begun." There are still many pawns to sacrifice. The man hung up the phone, a faint smile spreading across his face. The lights flickered out in the dark room, and the shadows once again consumed everything. As for Daniel, in the final days before he moved away, he returned to the spot where the cabin once stood. All that was left was a patch of scorched earth, the ashes long blown away by the wind, a few charred wooden posts remaining. Daniel stepped forward, gently placing his hand on one of the remaining pieces of wood, imagining the charming wooden house, its four walls filled with love and memories. He stood still for a while, then looked up toward the pine trees. The setting sun's light filtered through the leaves, reminding him that even when one day ends, the sun will still rise the next. Standing before the scorched ground, he whispered to himself, "They can take my house, but they can't take me." It was at that moment Daniel realized that people could lose their possessions, they could be hurt, but as long as their spirit remained strong, they could always rise again. And sometimes, the struggle of one individual can shake a community paralyzed by fear. Daniel's story shows that when facing injustice, if we stay silent, the evil will continue to reign. But if we dare to stand up, even at great cost, the light of justice still has a chance to shine. Karen Whitmore's case was a wake-up call for the townspeople to realize that what seemed like money and glory sometimes hid violence and crime. Daniel lost his cabin. His family was forced to leave. Jason still hadn't fully cleared his name. But from this story, they learned the meaning of resilience and courage. For you, if you were in Daniel's shoes, oppressed by someone in power, would you fight back or run? Share your thoughts with us. Don't forget that every action, no matter how small, can lead to great changes. The power lies not only in force or wealth, but more importantly, in the strength of the spirit and the belief in what is right. Finally, if this story has made you reflect or moved you, leave a comment below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Crazy Neighbor Drama channel so we can follow the next dramas together. Justice might come slowly, but it will always find a way to shine. Daniel Thompson lost his cabin, lost his peace, and almost lost his life, but he didn't lose himself. He understood that sometimes, if you don't stand up, the bad guys will continue to rule. Justice isn't always easy to achieve, but if you persevere, it will find its way to shine. If you were in Daniel's shoes, oppressed by powerful forces, threatened, pushed to the limit, would you fight back or run? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Crazy Neighbor Drama channel so you don't miss out on more intense, dramatic, and emotional stories like this.